You've spent your whole life feeling like you're on the outside looking in. Not because you're shy or awkward or socially inept, but because there's something fundamentally different about the way you experience the world. You walk into a room, and while everyone else seems to plug in effortlessly, you're acutely aware of the performance required to belong. You can do it. You've learned how to mirror, how to adapt, how to say the right things, and laugh at the right moments. But it costs you something. It drains you in a way that it doesn't seem to drain other people. And you've probably spent years wondering what's wrong with you, why you can't just be normal, why you feel like an alien in a world where everyone else got the manual for how to be human and you somehow missed the distribution. Maybe as a child, you were the one who preferred books to playgrounds, who asked questions that made adults uncomfortable, who noticed things that other kids walked right past. Maybe you were called sensitive, intense, too serious, too much. Maybe you learned early that the parts of you that felt most real were the parts that other people found most uncomfortable. And so you learned to hide them. You learned to perform a version of yourself that was more palatable, more acceptable, more normal. But that performance has been exhausting, hasn't it? And somewhere along the way, you started to lose track of who you actually are underneath all the layers of adaptation. The truth is, you're not broken. You're not defective. You're not the mistake you've been made to feel like. You're simply wired differently than the majority of people around you. And that difference, the one you've been taught to hide and manage and apologize for, is not a flaw in your design. It's a feature. It's what makes you capable of seeing what others miss, feeling what others skim over, understanding complexities that others find unnecessary. But living in a world that doesn't understand or value these differences is profoundly isolating. It's like being fluent in a language that no one else speaks, having a hunger for conversations that no one else wants to have, needing things that the world tells you are excessive or unreasonable, and the constant message that you're too much or not enough, too sensitive or too complicated, too deep or too distant. It gets inside you. It becomes the voice in your head that tells you that if you just tried harder, if you just fixed yourself, if you just learned to be more like everyone else, then you'd finally fit in. But the problem was never you. The problem was never that you feel too much or think too deeply or need more silence than others. The problem is a world that mistakes difference for deficiency, that confuses intensity for instability, that treats depth as a disorder rather than a gift. People who feel out of place often possess an extraordinary level of self-awareness. They've spent their entire lives analyzing social dynamics, studying human behavior, trying to decode the unwritten rules that everyone else seems to absorb effortlessly. This constant observation and analysis makes them incredibly perceptive. They can read a room within seconds. They can sense the undercurrents of tension, the unspoken conflicts, the carefully maintained facades that everyone is performing. They notice the micro-expressions that flicker across someone's face before they settle into the socially acceptable mask. They hear the tremor in a voice that everyone else misses. They feel the shift in energy when someone is pretending to be okay, but is actually falling apart inside. And this level of perception is both a gift and a curse. It's a gift because it allows for profound empathy, for genuine connection, for the ability to see and understand people in ways that most never will. It's a curse because you can't unsee what you see. You can't unhear the pain in someone's voice. You can't unfeel the desperation behind their smile. And you carry all of that awareness with you, all the time, with no off switch and no way to explain to people why a casual conversation at a party left you emotionally exhausted. And I need to pause here and ask you something directly. Have you always felt like you were performing? Like there's a version of you that you show the world and a completely different person that exists in private? Do you feel like you're constantly translating yourself into a language that others can understand, simplifying your thoughts, moderating your emotions, making yourself smaller so that others feel comfortable? If the answer is yes, I want you to leave a comment right now. Something simple like, "I've always felt like an outsider." Because when you name this experience, when you put it into words and share it, you're doing two things. You're validating your own reality, and you're letting someone else who's reading this know that they're not the only one. And I need you to understand that leaving this comment takes courage. It's you finally acknowledging something you've carried in silence for too long. So go ahead, comment, and know that I see you. Now let me continue. If you need more silence than others, it's not because you're antisocial or depressed or broken. It's because your nervous system processes information differently. While most people can filter out background noise, ignore irrelevant stimuli, and focus on one thing at a time, your brain is taking in everything. Every sound, every visual detail, every emotional nuance, every sensory input is being registered and processed. And all of that processing requires energy, massive amounts of energy. So when you spend time in social situations, in loud environments, in chaotic spaces, you're not just participating in the activity. You're simultaneously processing hundreds of data points that others aren't even aware of. You're managing your own emotional response while also absorbing and processing everyone else's emotions. You're navigating the social dynamics while also being hyper-aware of the physical environment. You're engaging in conversation while also hearing every other conversation happening around you, while also noticing the flickering light that's giving you a headache, while also feeling the texture of your clothing against your skin that's suddenly unbearable. This is why you need silence. Not the absence of sound, though that helps, but the absence of demand, the absence of stimulation, the absence of having to manage everyone else's comfort while ignoring your own overwhelm. Silence, for you, is not emptiness. It's restoration. It's the space where your nervous system can finally settle, where you can process all the input you've absorbed, where you can reconnect with yourself without the constant noise of the world drowning you out. And if you've been made to feel guilty for this need, if you've been called antisocial or told you need to be more outgoing or made to believe that wanting to be alone means something is wrong with you, I need you to hear this. Your need for silence is legitimate. It's not a preference or a luxury. It's a requirement for your well-being. It's how you regulate your nervous system, how you maintain your mental and emotional health, how you recharge so that you can function in a world that constantly demands more than you can comfortably give. People who think deeply were often told to stop overthinking. They were told they analyze too much, that they make things too complicated, that they need to just let things go and not think so hard about everything. And so they learned to hide their thoughts. They learned to keep their observations to themselves. They learned that the questions they asked made people uncomfortable, that the connections they made seemed strange to others, that the depth they naturally gravitated toward was too intense for casual conversation. But here's what no one told them. The ability to think deeply, to see patterns, to make connections across seemingly unrelated concepts, to question assumptions and dig beneath surface explanations, this is not a flaw. This is a profound cognitive gift. Deep thinkers are the philosophers, the innovators, the artists, the scientists who push humanity forward. They're the ones who refuse to accept easy answers, who keep asking why, who see possibilities where others see dead ends. But growing up as a deep thinker in a world that values quick answers and simple explanations is incredibly isolating. You learn to dumb yourself down. You learn to give the expected response instead of the honest one. You learn to laugh along with jokes you don't find funny and to nod along with ideas you fundamentally disagree with because expressing your actual thoughts would make you seem difficult or pretentious or like you're trying too hard. And over time, you lose touch with your own intellectual voice. You stop trusting your own mind. You start to believe that maybe everyone else is right. Maybe you do overthink everything. Maybe there is something wrong with the way your brain works. But your brain is working exactly as it's designed to work. It's just designed differently than the majority. And that difference is what allows you to see what others miss, to understand what others oversimplify, to create what others couldn't imagine. Your thoughts have value. Your observations matter. Your questions are important. And the fact that they make other people uncomfortable doesn't mean you should stop asking them. It means you need to find people who can engage with you at the depth you operate at, who welcome complexity instead of fearing it, who see your intellect as an asset rather than an annoyance. And yes, those people are harder to find. They're not at every party or in every workplace or in every social circle, but they exist. And when you find them, when you have a conversation where you don't have to translate yourself, where you can think out loud without being told you're overthinking, where your depth is matched instead of merely tolerated, it's like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for years. If you don't fit in, it means you were never meant to. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because fitting in would require you to betray fundamental parts of who you are. Fitting in would mean performing a version of yourself that's acceptable to the majority, while abandoning the parts of yourself that are most real. Fitting in would mean laughing at jokes that aren't funny, engaging in conversations that bore you, pretending to care about things that feel meaningless, and suppressing the thoughts and feelings and needs that make you different. And maybe you've tried this. Maybe you've spent years contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for people like you. Maybe you've succeeded at it, at least externally. Maybe people think you fit in just fine. But inside, you know the truth. You know that you're performing. You know that the person people see is not the person you actually are. You know that the belonging you've created is contingent on continued self-betrayal. And that kind of belonging doesn't nourish you. It depletes you. Not fitting in is not a failure. It's information. It's your system telling you that this space, this group, this environment, it's not aligned with who you actually are. And instead of trying harder to fit in, instead of working harder to be someone you're not, what if you took that energy and redirected it toward finding or creating spaces where you can belong as yourself? What if you stopped seeing your difference as a problem to solve and started seeing it as a filter, a way of identifying which people and places and experiences are actually right for you? Because the truth is, you will never feel truly fulfilled trying to belong in spaces that require you to hide. You will never feel truly seen in relationships where you have to perform. You will never feel truly at peace in environments that demand you be someone other than who you are. And all the energy you've been putting into fitting in could be redirected toward finding your actual people, building your actual life, creating spaces where difference is welcomed rather than merely tolerated. People who feel too intensely are often taught that their emotions are excessive, dramatic, too much. They cry too easily. They get too excited. They care too much about things that don't matter. They take everything too personally. And so they learn to numb themselves. They learn to intellectualize their feelings, to dismiss them, to push them down and pretend they don't exist. They develop elaborate coping mechanisms to avoid feeling the full force of their emotions, because they've been taught that those emotions are inappropriate, that they need to be controlled, that they make other people uncomfortable. But emotional intensity is not a disorder. It's a way of experiencing life. People who feel intensely experience joy more vividly, love more deeply, beauty more profoundly. They're moved by art and music and nature in ways that others don't understand. They form deep attachments. They feel other people's pain as if it were their own. They're capable of profound empathy, of genuine compassion, of connections that go beyond surface pleasantries. But they also feel pain more acutely. Rejection cuts deeper. Disappointment hits harder. Conflict feels unbearable. Criticism can be devastating. And in a world that tells them to toughen up, to not be so sensitive, to get over it, they learn to see their emotional intensity as a weakness rather than a strength. They learn to apologize for feeling. They learn to hide their tears, to swallow their excitement, to moderate their enthusiasm, so that they don't make others uncomfortable with the force of their aliveness. And this is one of the cruelest forms of self-abandonment. Because when you shut down your capacity to feel intensely, you don't just shut down the painful emotions. You shut down all of it. You can't selectively numb. If you numb the pain, you also numb the joy. If you suppress the sadness, you also suppress the delight. If you control the intensity of your negative emotions, you also control the intensity of your positive ones. And you end up living this muted, half-alive existence where you're safe from the depths of pain, but also cut off from the heights of joy. What if your emotional intensity is not something to fix? What if it's actually one of your greatest strengths? What if the ability to feel deeply is what makes you capable of creating meaningful art, building profound relationships, experiencing beauty in ways that make life worth living? What if the world doesn't need you to feel less, but rather needs to create more space for people who feel more? Your emotions are not excessive. They're not dramatic. They're not too much. They're yours. They're real. They're valid. And they deserve to be honored, not suppressed. This doesn't mean you let your emotions control you, or that you're not responsible for how you express them. It means you stop apologizing for having them. It means you stop treating your capacity to feel as a burden and start recognizing it as the profound gift it actually is. If you've always felt different, it's probably because you've been different from the beginning. Not different in the sense of defective, but different in the sense of operating with a different template. Maybe you were the child who asked too many questions, who needed explanations for things that other kids just accepted, who couldn't move on from something until you understood it completely. Maybe you were the kid who had intense interests that other children found boring, who wanted to talk about death and existence and meaning when everyone else was content with surface play. Maybe you were the child who formed deep attachments to one or two friends instead of having a large group, who preferred meaningful conversation to casual socializing, who felt exhausted by birthday parties and sleepovers that other kids seemed to thrive in. And maybe the adults in your life didn't know what to do with you. Maybe they tried to normalize you, to make you more like the other kids, to fix whatever they perceived was wrong. Maybe your intensity scared them. Maybe your questions challenged them. Maybe your needs overwhelmed them. And so you learned that being yourself was a problem. You learned to hide your curiosity because it annoyed people. You learned to suppress your enthusiasm because it was too much. You learned to stop asking questions because they made adults uncomfortable. You learned to perform normalcy even though normal never felt right, never felt true, never felt like you. And this is the wound that so many different people carry. The wound of being taught from childhood that who they are is not acceptable, that they need to be someone else to be loved, that their authentic self is too much or not enough or just fundamentally wrong. And that wound shapes everything. It shapes how you show up in relationships. Always performing, always monitoring, always making sure you're not being too much. It shapes how you move through the world, with this constant underlying anxiety that people will see through your mask and reject the real you underneath. It shapes how you see yourself, with this deep-seated belief that there's something fundamentally flawed about who you are. But what if there's nothing wrong with you? What if you were never the problem? What if the problem was environments that couldn't accommodate difference, adults who didn't have the capacity to honor intensity, systems that rewarded conformity and punished uniqueness? What if your difference is not a defect, but a different way of being human that's just as valid, just as valuable, just as worthy of space and respect as the more common ways of being? Because here's the thing. Different doesn't mean less than. It just means different. And in a world that treats difference as deficiency, in a culture that pathologizes anything outside the norm, in systems that demand conformity as the price of belonging, being different feels like being wrong. But you're not wrong. You're just not the same as the majority. And the majority is not a measure of rightness. It's just a measure of frequency. If this is resonating with you, if you're feeling seen in a way you rarely experience, do me a favor and leave a like on this video. It tells me that this content matters, that these conversations are needed, that there are people out there who are hungry for this level of depth and honesty. Because what I'm trying to build here is not just a channel, but a community. A space for people who've always felt different, who think too much and feel too deeply, who need more silence and crave more meaning than the world typically offers. A space where difference is not just tolerated, but celebrated, where intensity is welcomed, where depth is the norm rather than the exception. Let's talk about what it actually costs to spend your life trying to be someone you're not. Let's talk about the toll that constant performance takes on your mental health, your emotional well-being, your sense of self. When you're always monitoring how you come across, always adjusting your personality to match the room, always suppressing your authentic reactions in favor of socially acceptable ones, you're living in a state of chronic stress. Your nervous system never gets to fully relax because you're never fully safe to be yourself. There's always a part of you that's on guard, scanning for threats, managing perceptions, making sure the mask doesn't slip. And this constant vigilance is exhausting. It leads to anxiety, depression, burnout. It leads to losing touch with who you actually are because you've spent so long being who you think others need you to be. You might struggle with decision-making because you genuinely don't know what you want anymore. You've been so focused on what others want, what others expect, what others will approve of, that your own desires have become background noise you can barely hear. You might struggle with self-trust because you've been taught that your perceptions are wrong, your feelings are excessive, your needs are unreasonable. So even when your gut is screaming that something is off, you override it, you second-guess it, you convince yourself that you're overreacting or being too sensitive. You might struggle with relationships because you're terrified that if people see the real you, they'll leave. So you keep performing, keep pretending, keep giving them the version of you that you think they want, all while feeling desperately lonely because no one actually knows you. And here's the painful truth. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone if those people only know your mask. You can be in a long-term relationship and still feel unseen if your partner only knows the performed version of you. You can have a full social calendar and still feel isolated if none of those social interactions allow you to show up authentically. The loneliness of being unknown while being surrounded by people is one of the most painful forms of isolation. Because it's a loneliness you can't easily explain. On paper, your life might look fine. You have friends, family, maybe a partner. You're not literally alone. But emotionally, spiritually, you're completely isolated because the person people think they know is not the person you actually are. And maybe you've tried to show people the real you. Maybe you've tested the waters, revealed a bit more of your authentic self, and the response was uncomfortable silence, or dismissal, or that look that says you're being too much. And so you pulled back. You recalibrated. You adjusted the mask and made sure it fit tighter. And every time this happens, it reinforces the belief that the real you is not acceptable, that you were right to hide, that your difference is indeed a problem. But what if the problem wasn't you? What if the problem was that you were trying to be authentic in relationships and environments that couldn't handle authenticity? What if you were trying to be deep with people who were committed to staying surface? What if you were trying to be real in spaces that only allowed for performance? This is why finding your people is so crucial. Not people who tolerate your difference, but people who celebrate it. Not people who make space for your intensity occasionally, but people who match it. Not people who accept that you need more silence, but people who need it too, and understand it completely. And I know how hard it is to find these people. I know that they're not everywhere. I know that you've probably been disappointed before, thought you found someone who got it only to realize they didn't, not really. But they exist. There are people out there who think the way you think, who feel the way you feel, who need what you need. And when you find them, everything changes. Suddenly you're not performing anymore. Suddenly you can take off the mask and breathe. Suddenly the loneliness lifts because you're finally being seen as you actually are. And if you want to be part of a community like that, if you want to keep exploring these ideas and connecting with others who understand what it's like to feel different, subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications, because every week I create content specifically for people like us. People who don't fit the mold. People who've been told they're too much or not enough. People who are tired of pretending and ready to start living authentically. This is more than just content. It's a gathering place for those of us who've felt like outsiders our whole lives and are finally ready to come home to ourselves. Let's talk about the gifts that come with being different. Because yes, there are costs, there's pain, there's isolation. There's the exhaustion of never quite fitting in. But there are also profound gifts that people who fit in easily will never access. Your difference has shaped you into someone with extraordinary depth. You've spent your whole life observing, analyzing, trying to understand the world around you and your place in it. This has made you incredibly self-aware. You know yourself in ways that people who've never questioned their place in the world don't. You understand your patterns, your triggers, your needs, your values. And even though this self-knowledge sometimes feels like a burden, like you're cursed with too much awareness, it's also what allows you to grow, to heal, to make conscious choices instead of just reacting out of unconscious programming. Your difference has also made you deeply empathetic. Because you know what it feels like to be on the outside, you're sensitive to other people's pain. You notice when someone is struggling even when they're hiding it. You can sense when someone feels left out, misunderstood, unseen. And you have a natural instinct to reach out, to include, to make space for them in ways that you wish someone had done for you. This capacity for empathy is a profound gift. It's what allows you to build deep, meaningful connections. It's what makes you a safe person for others to open up to. It's what allows you to hold space for people's pain without trying to fix it or minimize it. Your difference has made you creative. Because you see the world through a different lens, you make connections that others don't make. You see possibilities where others see limitations. You question assumptions that others accept without thought. This different perspective is the foundation of creativity, of innovation, of art that moves people and ideas that change the world. Every person who has created something truly original, who has challenged the status quo, who has pushed humanity forward in some way, They were different. They saw things differently. They thought differently. They refused to conform even when conformity would have been easier. Your difference has given you resilience. You've spent your whole life navigating a world that wasn't designed for you. You've learned to adapt, to survive, to find ways to meet your needs even when the environment didn't support them. You've developed coping strategies, found pockets of solace, created inner worlds when the outer world felt hostile. And while you shouldn't have had to develop this resilience, while it would have been better if the world had simply made space for you as you are, the fact remains that you have it. You're stronger than you realize. You've survived everything that's tried to break you, everything that's told you you're wrong, everything that's demanded you be someone else, and you're still here. You're still you. And that's extraordinary. Your thoughts are not too complicated. Your feelings are not too intense. Your needs are not too demanding. These are the lies you've been told by a world that benefits from your conformity, that's more comfortable when you shrink yourself, that doesn't want to make room for difference because difference requires adaptation and effort. But the truth is that your complexity is your richness, your intensity is your aliveness, your needs are your compass, pointing you toward what you actually require to thrive. And when you stop trying to simplify yourself, when you stop apologizing for your intensity, when you stop pretending that you need less than you actually do, you finally get to experience what it's like to live in alignment with who you truly are. This doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. It doesn't mean everyone will understand you or that you'll never feel lonely or different again. But it means you stop fighting yourself. You stop treating yourself as the enemy, as the problem that needs to be solved. You start treating yourself as someone worthy of honor, of care, of accommodation. You start building a life that works for you instead of trying to force yourself into a life that works for everyone else. And this is where real healing begins. Not in becoming someone else, not in fixing your difference, but in accepting it, honoring it, building your life around it. You deserve relationships where you don't have to perform. You deserve work that engages your depth instead of punishing it. You deserve environments that support your nervous system instead of overwhelming it. You deserve to take up space in the world exactly as you are. And I know that might feel impossible right now. I know you might be thinking that the world doesn't make room for people like you, that you have to conform to survive, that authenticity is a luxury you can't afford. But every time you betray yourself to fit in, every time you suppress your truth to make others comfortable, every time you shrink yourself to avoid judgment, you're choosing a life of disconnection. You're choosing to be known by no one, including yourself. And that's not survival. That's slow death. What if you started making different choices? Small ones at first. What if you stopped laughing at jokes you don't find funny? What if you started saying no to social events that drain you without apology or explanation? What if you let yourself be quiet in conversations instead of forcing yourself to perform engagement? What if you started sharing your actual thoughts instead of the sanitized version you think people want to hear? What if you started seeking out the music, the art, the books, the ideas that actually resonate with you instead of consuming what's popular? What if you started building a life that feels true instead of one that looks right? These small acts of authenticity compound. Each time you choose truth over performance, you strengthen your connection to yourself. Each time you honor your needs instead of overriding them, you build self-trust. Each time you let someone see the real you and they stay, you heal a little bit of the wound that says you're only lovable when you're pretending. It's not easy. It requires courage. It means risking rejection. It means accepting that some people won't understand, won't like you, won't make space for who you actually are. But it also means the possibility of being truly known. Of being loved for who you are instead of who you pretend to be. Of finally coming home to yourself. And here's what I know to be true. You are not alone in this. There are so many of us who've felt different our whole lives, who've struggled to fit in, who've wondered what's wrong with us. We're the sensitive ones, the deep thinkers, the intense feelers, the people who need more silence and crave more meaning than the world typically offers. We're the ones who've been told we're too much and not enough, who've spent years trying to fix ourselves only to realize that we were never broken. We're the ones who are finally waking up to the truth that our difference is not a defect. It's who we are. And it's time to stop apologizing for it. You don't need to be fixed. You don't need to be more like everyone else. You don't need to shrink yourself or dull your intensity or pretend that you need less than you do. What you need is to find your people, to build your life, to create spaces where you can exist as yourself without translation. What you need is to stop seeing your difference as a problem and start seeing it as information, as a guide toward what's actually right for you. What you need is to come home to yourself, to honor the truth of who you are, to live in alignment with your actual needs and values and desires instead of the ones you think you should have. This is your permission slip. Permission to be different. Permission to need what you need. Permission to feel what you feel. Permission to think the thoughts that others find too complicated. Permission to crave the depth that others find unnecessary. Permission to require the silence that others don't understand. Permission to be exactly who you are without apology, without explanation, without making yourself smaller so that others feel bigger. You are enough. You have always been enough. And your difference is not something to overcome. It's something to embrace. Because the world doesn't need more people who fit in. The world needs more people who are brave enough to stand out, to be themselves, to honor their truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, even when it would be so much easier to just conform. The world needs you, not the performed version, not the diminished version. You, exactly as you are. Different, deep, intense, and wholly, completely yourself.